The emergency klaxon screamed through the corridors of the Zarathian flagship Crimson Talon, as massive hull breaches sent torrents of icy water cascading into the lower decks. Commander Sarah Chen pressed herself against the bulkhead, her human-issued emergency suit already activating its environmental systems as the alien vessel listed dangerously to starboard. The diplomatic mission had been going so well. 3 months of delicate negotiations between the Terran Federation and the Zarathian Empire, with Sarah serving as the chief medical liaison. The Zarathians were a proud warrior race, standing nearly 9 feet tall with chitinous exoskeletons that gleamed like polished obsidian. Their Prince Vextar had been surprisingly receptive to human medical techniques, especially after Sarah had successfully treated a parasitic infection that their own physicians couldn't cure. But now everything was falling apart. The surprise attack by the hegemony forces had caught everyone off guard. The Crimson Talon, despite being one of the Empire's most advanced warships, was taking devastating hits from the enemy's plasma cannons. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in an eerie red glow, as the ship's systems struggled to maintain basic functions. Sarah's comm unit crackled to life. "All diplomatic personnel to evacuation pods immediately," came the voice of Captain Morrison from the human escort vessel. "The Zarathian ship is going down fast." She started moving toward the designated evacuation zone, her magnetic boots clanking against the metal flooring that was already beginning to tilt at an unnatural angle. Water was everywhere now, rushing through damaged ventilation shafts and emergency exits. The Zarathian crew members she passed were moving with disciplined efficiency, their multiple arms working controls and carrying wounded comrades despite the chaos around them. That's when she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze. It wasn't the mechanical groaning of stressed metal or the hiss of escaping atmosphere. It was organic, desperate, and utterly terrifying, a roar that spoke of panic and mortal fear. Following the sound, Sarah found herself deviating from the evacuation route, her medical training overriding her survival instincts. The roar came again, louder and more desperate. She traced it to a section of the ship she'd never been in before, Prince Vextar's personal quarters. The entrance had been partially crushed by falling debris, but Sarah managed to squeeze through the gap. Inside, the scene was chaos. Expensive furniture floated in 3 feet of freezing water that continued to rise rapidly. Ancient Zarathian artifacts and ceremonial weapons bobbed like toys in the surge. And there, in the center of the flooding chamber, was the most magnificent creature Sarah had ever seen. The lion was massive, easily twice the size of any earth lion she'd studied. Its mane was a deep golden color that seemed to shimmer even in the emergency lighting, and its muscles rippled beneath a coat that was somehow both familiar and alien. This wasn't just any lion. This was clearly a genetically enhanced specimen, probably bred specifically for the royal family. But right now, the magnificent beast was drowning. Its powerful limbs thrashed desperately against the rising water, but with each passing second, it was losing the fight. The lion's eyes, intelligent eyes that held a spark of consciousness that reminded Sarah of the dolphins back on Earth, found hers across the flooding room. In that moment, she saw something that transcended species barriers, a plea for help. "Where's Prince Vextar?" she called out to the lion, knowing it couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone would be calming. The water was now up to the creature's neck, and she could see exhaustion beginning to take its toll. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. The prince had obviously evacuated, probably assuming his pet could swim or that someone would come back for it. But lions, even enhanced ones, weren't built for prolonged swimming, especially not in the freezing water that was clearly taking its toll on the animal's core body temperature. The water level rose another few inches, and the lion's roar became more of a desperate whimper. Its massive paws were slipping against the smooth walls as it tried to find purchase on something, anything that would keep its head above the surface. Sarah looked around the flooding chamber, her emergency training kicking in. There had to be something she could use. Floating debris, furniture, anything that could serve as a flotation device or platform. But everything was either too heavy, too damaged, or already sinking. The lion's head went under for a moment and Sarah's heart stopped. When it surfaced again, gasping and coughing, she knew she had maybe minutes before the magnificent creature would be lost forever. Her comm unit crackled again. "Dr. Chen, where are you? The ship's structural integrity is failing." You need to get to the evacuation pods now. Sarah looked at the lion, then at the communication device. The right choice was obvious: save herself, get to the evacuation pods, and let the Zarathians handle their own affairs. She was a diplomat and a medic, not a rescue specialist. She had no training in water rescue and certainly no experience with alien fauna. But as she watched the lion struggle, something fundamental in her human nature rebelled against the logical choice. This was a sentient being in distress. It might not be human, it might not even be from Earth, but it was suffering, and she had the knowledge and tools to help. The water continued to rise, now lapping at the lion's nostrils. The creature's eyes, filled with a very human-like intelligence and desperation, locked onto hers again. In that gaze, Sarah saw something that decided everything for her. She saw trust. Somehow this alien creature was looking to her, a small, fragile human, for salvation. It didn't matter that she was a different species, from a different world. What mattered was that she was here, and she had a choice to make. Sarah began stripping off her outer equipment, keeping only the essential environmental systems of her emergency suit. If she was going to do this, she needed to be as mobile as possible. The water was shockingly cold, even through her suit's thermal regulation, and she gasped as she lowered herself into the flood. "I'm coming," she called to the lion, though she knew it couldn't understand her words. But somehow the creature seemed to understand her intent, its struggles becoming slightly less frantic as Sarah began swimming toward it, through the debris-filled water. The ship lurched again, and more water poured in through a fresh rupture in the hull. Time was running out for both of them. The freezing water bit through Sarah's emergency suit as she fought her way through the floating debris toward the struggling lion. Each stroke was a battle against the current that was now pouring in through multiple hull breaches. The magnificent creature's eyes never left her face, and she could see a mixture of hope and confusion in its intelligent gaze. "Easy. Big guy," Sarah called out, trying to keep her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "I'm not going to hurt you." As she drew closer, she was struck by just how massive the lion truly was. Even partially submerged, its shoulders were broader than her entire torso. The creature's mane floated around its head like a golden halo, and she could see the genetic modifications that had been made to enhance its size and intelligence. This wasn't just a pet, this was a companion, possibly even a friend to Prince Vextar. The lion's breathing was becoming more labored, and Sarah could see the telltale signs of hypothermia beginning to set in. Its movements were becoming sluggish, and the constant struggle against the rising water was exhausting its reserves. She had maybe 2 minutes before the creature would lose consciousness and sink beneath the surface. Sarah's medical training kicked in as she assessed the situation. The lion was too large for her to physically support in the water, and even if she could get it to some kind of floating platform, the creature was clearly in shock and approaching respiratory distress. What it needed was immediate warmth and a way to get out of the water entirely. Looking around the flooding chamber, Sarah spotted something that might work: a section of the prince's ceremonial platform that had broken free from its moorings. The ornate structure was made from some kind of lightweight but durable material that the Zarathians used in their ship construction. It was floating, partially submerged but stable, and if she could get the lion onto it— "Okay, here's what we're going to do," she said to the lion, swimming closer until she could actually touch its massive head. The creature didn't shy away from her contact, which she took as a good sign. "I'm going to guide you over to that platform. You're going to have to help me, though." "I can't do this alone." The lion seemed to understand something in her tone, because its struggles became more coordinated, more purposeful. Sarah positioned herself beside the creature's massive shoulder and began guiding it toward the makeshift raft. The water was now up to what would have been the lion's chest level if it were standing, and she could feel the creature's strength beginning to fail. "Come on, stay with me," she urged, using one hand to support the lion's head, while using the other to propel them both toward the floating platform. "We're almost there." The ship lurched again, and a new torrent of water came crashing through the ceiling. Sarah looked up to see that the chamber above had also been breached, and they were now taking on water from multiple levels. The evacuation pods would be launching any minute, and she still hadn't figured out how to get herself and a half-ton lion out of this flooding death trap. Her comm unit sputtered to life, the signal weak and broken. "Where?" "Ship breaking. Evacuation in minutes." She reached the platform just as the lion's strength gave out entirely. The massive creature went limp in the water, its eyes rolling back as hypothermia and exhaustion finally overwhelmed it. Sarah felt panic surge through her as she realized the lion was going into shock. Without hesitation, she activated the emergency medical protocols in her suit. The bioscanners immediately began analyzing the lion's vital signs, and what they found made her heart race. Core temperature dropping rapidly, respiratory distress, and signs of cardiac irregularity. The creature was dying. "Not on my watch," Sarah muttered, struggling to get the lion's massive head and shoulders onto the floating platform. The creature was dead weight now, and even with her suit's strength enhancements, it was like trying to lift a small spacecraft. She managed to get the lion's front paws and head onto the platform, but the rest of its body was still in the water. That would have to be enough for now. Sarah hauled herself up onto the platform and immediately began emergency medical procedures. First, she activated the thermal regulation systems in her suit and carefully wrapped part of her emergency blanket around the lion's head and neck. The advanced materials immediately began reflecting the creature's own body heat back to it, helping to combat the hypothermia. Next, she began checking the lion's breathing. Its massive chest was barely rising and falling, and she could see fluid in its mouth and nostrils. The creature had aspirated water and was drowning even out of the flood. Sarah had never performed CPR on anything larger than a human, but the principles were the same. She positioned her hands on the lion's massive chest and began compressions, counting out the rhythm she'd been trained on. The creature's ribcage was enormous, and she had to use her entire body weight to achieve effective compression. "Come on," she said through gritted teeth as she worked. "Don't you dare die on me now." After 30 compressions, she moved to the lion's head and carefully opened its mouth. The creature's tongue was massive, easily the size of her forearm, and she had to use both hands to clear the airway. Then she formed as tight a seal as she could over the lion's nostrils and began rescue breathing. The first breath she gave seemed to disappear into the creature's massive lung capacity. The second and third were the same. Sarah was beginning to panic when suddenly the lion's body convulsed and it began coughing up the water it had inhaled. "That's it," Sarah said, relief flooding through her as the creature's eyes fluttered open. "Come on back to us." The lion's golden eyes found hers, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. It was recognition, yes, but more than that, it was gratitude. This intelligent creature understood exactly what she had done for it. The platform lurched as more debris hit it, and Sarah realized they were still in mortal danger. The water level in the chamber was continuing to rise, and soon even their makeshift raft would be submerged. She needed to find a way to get them both out of here. Her comm unit crackled one more time. "Dr. Chen, final evacuation call. Launching pods in 60 seconds with or without you." Sarah looked down at the lion, which was now breathing steadily, but was still clearly weak from its ordeal. There was no way she could get the creature to the evacuation pods in time. And even if she could, there was no way it would fit. She was going to have to find another way out, and she was going to have to do it fast. The lion seemed to sense her distress, because it raised its massive head and let out a soft rumbling sound that somehow managed to be reassuring, despite their desperate situation. "Don't worry," Sarah said, stroking the creature's mane. "I'm not leaving you behind. We're getting out of this together." Sarah's mind raced as she studied their surroundings, looking for any possible escape route. The chamber was completely flooded now, with only a few feet of airspace remaining near the ceiling. The lion was stable but still weak, and there was no way it could swim to safety on its own. The evacuation pods were gone. She could hear the distant sound of their launch systems firing as the human contingent fled the dying ship. That's when she noticed something odd about the lion's breathing pattern. Despite having nearly drowned, the creature seemed to be holding its breath for unusually long periods. She watched more carefully and realized that the genetic modifications hadn't just enhanced the lion's size and intelligence, they had also improved its lung capacity and oxygen efficiency. "You can hold your breath longer than a normal lion, can't you?" she said, studying the creature's massive chest. "That's how you survived this long in the first place." The lion's golden eyes met hers, and she could swear she saw understanding there. It let out a low rumble that seemed almost like agreement. Sarah's emergency suit ran a quick bioscan of the creature and confirmed her suspicions. The lion's oxygen processing was roughly 3 times more efficient than baseline Earth felines, and idea began forming in her mind. It was crazy, probably suicidal, but it might be their only chance. She activated her suit's navigation system and studied the ship's schematics. The Zarathian flagship was built like a massive cathedral, with multiple levels connected by large central shafts. If she could get them to one of those shafts, they might be able to swim up to a level that wasn't completely flooded. "Okay, big guy, here's the plan," she said to the lion, keeping her voice calm and steady. "There's a main access shaft about 50 meters from here. If we can swim that far underwater, we might be able to find an air pocket or a level that's still dry." The lion listened to her voice with an intensity that was almost human-like. Its enhanced intelligence was clearly processing not just her tone, but somehow understanding the gravity of their situation. When she finished speaking, the creature let out a deep, rumbling sound that she interpreted as agreement. Sarah began preparing for what might be the most dangerous swim of her life. She adjusted her suit's buoyancy controls and activated its emergency oxygen reserves. The suit could provide her with about 20 minutes of air underwater, but she hoped they wouldn't need nearly that long. The lion slowly pulled itself fully onto the platform, which creaked ominously under its weight. Despite its weakened condition, the creature was clearly preparing itself for the swim ahead. It took several deep breaths, filling its massive lungs to capacity. "When I tap your shoulder, we go," Sarah said, positioning herself at the edge of the platform. "Stay close to me, and if you need air, don't be a hero. Surface immediately." The water around them was murky with debris and strange-smelling chemicals from the ship's damaged systems. Sarah's suit automatically activated its filtration systems to protect her from potential toxins, but she worried about the lion's exposure to the alien substances. She tapped the lion's massive shoulder, and they both slipped into the water. Swimming underwater with a creature the size of a small spacecraft was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. The lion moved with surprising grace, its powerful limbs propelling it through the water with barely a splash. Despite its size, it somehow managed to stay right beside her, matching her pace perfectly. The emergency lighting was mostly underwater now, creating an eerie, shifting pattern of red and orange light that filtered through the murky water. Sarah's suit navigation system guided them through the maze of floating, debris and damaged bulkheads toward the main access shaft. They had been swimming for about 3 minutes when Sarah's heart nearly stopped. A massive piece of the ship's superstructure was falling directly toward them, displaced by another explosion somewhere above. The lion saw it too, and in a move that took Sarah's breath away, positioned its massive body between her and the falling debris. The metal beam struck the lion's back with a sound like thunder, and Sarah saw the creature's eyes widen in pain. But instead of being crushed, the lion's enhanced bone structure and muscle mass absorbed the impact. The beam bounced off and tumbled away into the darkness below. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, forgetting for a moment that they were underwater and that the lion couldn't understand her anyway. But the creature turned its head toward her and rumbled softly, somehow managing to convey that it was hurt but still able to continue. They pressed on, with Sarah now swimming slightly above the lion's back to provide what protection she could from falling debris. Her suit's sensors were picking up significant structural damage throughout this section of the ship, and she knew they only had minutes before the entire area collapsed completely. Finally, they reached the main access shaft. It was a massive circular tunnel that ran vertically through the ship, and Sarah could see that while the lower levels were flooded, there appeared to be air pockets higher up. The problem was that the shaft was at least 200 meters tall, and she wasn't sure either of them had the strength to swim that far upward. The lion surfaced beside her in the small air pocket at the bottom of the shaft, breathing heavily but steadily. Its golden eyes met hers in the dim emergency lighting, and she saw something there that filled her with determination. The creature wasn't giving up, and neither would she. Sarah activated her suit's emergency propulsion system, a small thruster pack designed for zero-gravity maneuvers that could also work underwater. It wouldn't be much help with the lion's massive weight, but it might give them the extra boost they needed. "We're going up," she told the lion, "all the way to the top if we have to." As they began their ascent through the flooded shaft, Sarah found herself thinking about the human drive to help others, regardless of species or circumstance. Here she was, risking her life for a creature she'd only just met, an alien animal that by all rights should have been none of her concern. But that was exactly what made humans special, she realized. It wasn't their technology or their weapons or their tactical brilliance that gave them their edge in the galaxy. It was their refusal to abandon others in need, their willingness to risk everything for a stranger, their absolute inability to walk away from suffering when they had the power to help. The lion stayed close to her as they swam upward through the shaft, and Sarah could feel the creature's trust in her growing with every meter they climbed. They were no longer just a human and an alien trying to survive. They were partners, each depending on the other for their very lives. Above them, she could see the faint glow of what might be emergency lighting from an upper level. They were going to make it. They had to. Sarah and the lion broke through the surface of the water into a large air pocket within the access shaft, both gasping for breath after their grueling swim upward. The emergency lighting here was brighter, revealing that they had reached one of the ship's middle decks. Sarah's suit readings showed they were about halfway up the massive vessel, and incredibly, this level still had atmosphere and artificial gravity. The lion hauled itself onto a maintenance platform with obvious effort, its massive frame shaking from exhaustion and the injury it had sustained from the falling debris. Sarah could see blood in the water around the creature's back legs, and her medical training immediately kicked in. "Let me take a look at that," she said, pulling herself up onto the platform beside the lion. The creature tensed initially, but then seemed to remember who she was and relaxed, allowing her to examine the wound. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. The beam had struck the lion's hindquarters, leaving a deep gash but missing anything vital. Sarah activated her suit's medical kit and began treating the injury with biofoam and synthetic tissue patches. The lion remained perfectly still throughout the procedure, occasionally rumbling softly as if to express gratitude. "You saved my life down there," Sarah said as she worked. "That debris would have crushed me." The lion turned its massive head to look at her, and she saw something in its eyes that made her pause. Intelligence, yes, but also something that looked remarkably like affection. As she finished treating the wound, Sarah became aware of sounds echoing through the shaft from above, Zarathian voices, urgent and commanding. Her suit's translation software kicked in, parsing the alien language into something she could understand. Prince is demanding search. Teams, his companion must be found. Structural. Integrity failing. We cannot spare more. Personnel. The, human diplomat was also lost in that section. Perhaps they're together. Sarah's heart leaped. They weren't alone on the ship after all. Prince Vextar was still here, still looking for his companion. But from the sound of the conversation, the search teams were being recalled due to the ship's deteriorating condition. She activated her comm unit and tried to reach the Zarathian frequencies. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen to any Zarathian personnel. I'm in the main access shaft, level 7, with Prince Vextar's companion. We need immediate assistance." Static filled the channel for several long moments before a familiar voice responded. Prince Vextar himself, his translated words carrying a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Dr. Chen, you are alive? And Kithara, my companion, is with you?" "Kithara is injured but stable," Sarah replied, looking at the lion with new understanding. "Kithara," the name suited the magnificent creature. "We're trapped in the main shaft. The lower levels are completely flooded. We are coming for you." The prince's voice crackled through the comm. "Hold your position." Sarah looked around their precarious refuge. The platform they were on was stable for now, but she could feel vibrations through the ship's hull that suggested more structural damage was accumulating. They didn't have long. Kithara seemed to sense her concern and moved closer, the lion's massive head nudging against her shoulder in what could only be described as a comforting gesture. Sarah found herself stroking the creature's mane, marveling at how soft it was despite everything they'd been through. "You know," she said to the lion, "I always wanted a cat when I was a kid. My parents said they were too much responsibility." She laughed softly at the irony. "I don't think they had anything quite like you in mind." Kithara rumbled in response, a sound that was somehow both powerful and gentle. The lion's golden eyes never left her face, and Sarah found herself wondering just how much the enhanced creature could understand. The intelligence there was unmistakable. This wasn't just an animal. It was a sentient being capable of complex thought and emotion. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the shaft from above, followed by the whir of Zarathian rescue equipment. Sarah could see lights beginning to descend toward their position. "They're coming for us," she told Kithara. We're going to be okay. But as the rescue team drew closer, Sarah began to hear something else. The groaning of overstressed metal and the ominous crack of structural supports beginning to fail. The ship was entering its final death throes, and she wasn't sure they had enough time. Prince Vexitar's voice came through the comm again. Urgent now. Dr. Chen, our sensors show catastrophic structural failure beginning in your section. We must evacuate immediately. Sarah looked up to see the rescue platform descending rapidly toward them. On it stood Prince Vextar himself, his obsidian exoskeleton gleaming in the emergency lighting. The Zarathian royal was even more imposing in person than she remembered, standing nearly 10 feet tall with 4 powerful arms and eyes that glowed with an inner fire. My friend, the prince called down to her, but his gaze was fixed on Kethara. Are you both unharmed? The lion Kethara is wounded but stable, Sarah replied. The real problem is going to be getting us both out of here. I don't think your rescue platform was designed for something his size. Prince Vextar's expression, as much as she could read on his alien features, showed both pride and determination. Dr. Chen, you have saved the life of my most treasured companion. There is nothing in the galaxy I would not do to ensure your safety. As the platform reached their level, Sarah could see that the prince had brought additional equipment, heavy-duty lifting gear and what appeared to be an emergency medical pod sized for large fauna. The Zarathians had clearly come prepared for Kethara's massive size, but as they began the complex process of transferring the injured lion to the rescue platform, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the sharp crack of structural supports failing somewhere above them. A shower of debris rained down into the shaft and the entire ship lurched violently to one side. We're out of time, Prince Vextar announced grimly. The ship's superstructure is collapsing. We have perhaps 2 minutes before this entire section implodes. Sarah looked at Kethara, then at the prince, and made a decision that surprised even herself. Get Kethara out of here first. He's injured and can't move as quickly as I can. I'll follow on the next trip. Absolutely not, Prince Vextar replied immediately.
You saved my companion's life.
I will not abandon you now. And I won't be responsible for that magnificent creature dying because we wasted time arguing. Sarah shot back. Get him to safety, then come back for me. That's an order from your chief medical liaison. Kethara seemed to understand the conversation even without the translation software. The lion let out a deep roar and tried to move towards Sarah, clearly unwilling to be separated from the human who had saved its life. It's okay, Sarah said, placing her hand on Kethara's massive head. Go with your prince. I'll be right behind you. The lion's golden eyes met hers one more time, and she saw something there that took her breath away. It was a look of absolute trust, but also a promise that their bond, forged in the depths of a dying ship, would not be broken by separation. As the rescue platform began its ascent with Kethara secured in the emergency pod, Sarah felt the ship lurch again. More debris crashed into the shaft around her, and she realized with growing dread that the prince might not make it back in time. Sarah watched the rescue platform disappear upward into the shaft, carrying Kethara to safety. She tried to ignore the increasingly violent shuddering of the ship around her and the growing pile of debris that was accumulating at the bottom of the flooded section below. Her small platform was holding steady, but she could hear the metal groaning under the stress of the ship's structural collapse. Her comm unit crackled to life. Dr. Chen, we have Kethara secured in the medical bay. I'm returning for you now. But our engineers estimate we have less than 90 seconds before this section becomes completely inaccessible. Sarah looked up the shaft and could see the prince's platform beginning its descent, but it seemed impossibly far away. The ship lurched again, more violently this time, and she had to grab onto the platform's safety railing to keep from being thrown into the water below. That's when she heard it, a sound that made her heart stop. From somewhere high above, Kethara was roaring. Not the panicked roar of a drowning animal, but something else entirely. It was a call, urgent and commanding, and somehow Sarah knew it was meant for her. What's happening up there? She called into her comm. Prince Vextar's response was strained. Kethara is agitated. He's refusing treatment and trying to break out of the medical bay. I think he believes you're in immediate danger. Another roar echoed down the shaft, and this time Sarah could have sworn she heard something almost like her name in the sound. It was impossible, of course. Lions couldn't speak, even enhanced ones. But the call was so specific, so directed at her that she felt compelled to respond. I'm here, Kethara. She called up the shaft, knowing it was ridiculous but unable to stop herself. "I'm okay." The roaring stopped immediately, replaced by a different sound, a low, rhythmic rumbling that seemed to be coming from multiple sources. Sarah's suit sensors picked up unusual vibration patterns, and she realized with amazement that other lions were responding to Kithara's call. "Prince Vextar," she said into her comm, "how many lions do you have on this ship?" "Kithara has 3 siblings," the prince replied, his platform now only about 50 meters away. "They're all responding to his distress call. Dr. Chen, I've never seen anything like this. They seem to understand that you saved their brother. The rescue platform was close now, but the ship chose that moment to suffer another catastrophic hull breach. The entire shaft filled with the sound of tearing metal, and Sarah watched in horror as a massive section of the ship's superstructure collapsed into the water below her. The impact sent waves surging up through the shaft, and her small platform was suddenly rocking violently in the churning water. "Jump," Prince Vextar shouted as his platform drew alongside hers. "The supports are failing." Sarah didn't hesitate. She launched herself across the gap between platforms just as her refuge finally gave way, and plunged into the depths below. She landed hard on the rescue platform, her suit automatically adjusting to absorb the impact. "Are you injured?" the prince asked as he secured her with safety restraints. "I'm fine," Sarah replied, though her hands were shaking from the adrenaline. "Let's get out of here before the whole shaft collapses." As they began their rapid ascent, Sarah found herself thinking about the bond she'd formed with Kithara in those desperate moments in the flooding chamber. It had been more than just a rescue. It had been a connection between 2 intelligent beings that transcended species barriers. They emerged from the shaft into the ship's upper levels, where the damage was less severe but still extensive. Emergency crews were working frantically to shore up critical systems, and Sarah could see that several sections of the ship had been completely sealed off to prevent further flooding. Prince Vextar led her quickly through the corridors toward the medical bay, and Sarah could hear the lions before she could see them. 4 distinct voices were calling back and forth in what could only be described as a conversation. When they reached the medical bay doors, she stopped in amazement. Through the transparent aluminum viewing port, she could see Kithara lying on a medical table designed for large fauna, with 3 other lions arranged around him in a protective circle. All 4 creatures were vocalizing in complex patterns that reminded Sarah of whale songs or dolphin. Communications, they're talking to each other, she breathed. The genetic modifications enhanced their cognitive abilities, as well as their physical attributes, Prince Vextar explained. They've developed their own form of communication over the years, but I've never seen them this organized, this purposeful. It's as if Kithara is telling them a story. Sarah approached the viewing port, and immediately all 4 lions turned to look at her. Kithara let out a soft rumble of recognition, and the other 3 began what could only be described as purring, a sound that somehow conveyed welcome and gratitude. "May I go in?" Sarah asked. "Are you certain?" "They're perfectly safe with me, but they're still predators, and you're not wearing protective gear." Sarah looked at the 4 magnificent creatures through the viewing port. "I trust them," she said simply. Prince Vextar activated the door controls, and Sarah stepped into the medical bay. The 3 lions she hadn't met before approached her cautiously, their massive heads lowering in what she recognized as a gesture of respect. Each one was slightly different, one with a darker mane, one with the distinctive markings on its face, and one that was smaller but somehow more graceful than the others. Kithara rumbled softly from his medical table, and the other 3 immediately stepped aside to allow Sarah to approach. As she drew near, the lion she'd saved extended one enormous paw toward her. Without hesitation, Sarah reached out and grasped it, feeling the warmth and strength in the creature's touch. "You're telling them what happened, aren't you?" she said to Kithara. "You're telling them how a crazy human jumped into freezing water to save your life." Kithara's golden eyes met hers, and she saw something there that took her breath away. It was love, pure, uncomplicated, and absolutely genuine. This magnificent creature loved her, not because she was useful or because she was expected to, but because she had shown kindness when it was needed most. The other 3 lions moved closer, and Sarah found herself surrounded by nearly 2 tons of enhanced predators, all of them radiating an aura of protection and acceptance. It was one of the most extraordinary moments of her life. Prince Vextar watched from the doorway, his alien features showing what she had learned to recognize as amazement. Dr. Chen, he said quietly, I believe you have just been formally adopted into the Pride. Sarah laughed, a sound that was part joy and part hysteria from everything they'd been through. Does this mean I'm going to need a bigger apartment when we get home? As if in response, all 4 lions began purring simultaneously, a sound so deep and resonant that Sarah could feel it in her bones. In that moment, surrounded by alien creatures who had accepted her as family, she realized that some bonds transcend species, planets, and even the vast distances between stars. The universe had just become a much smaller, much warmer place. 3 days after the rescue, Sarah found herself in an unprecedented situation. The Crimson Talon had been saved through the combined efforts of both Zarathian and human engineering teams. But the experience had fundamentally changed the relationship between the 2 species, and between Sarah and the Royal Pride. She was sitting in Prince Vextar's private chambers, which had been hastily converted into a diplomatic meeting room. The formal negotiations that had brought her to the Zarathian ship in the first place seemed almost trivial now, compared to what had happened in those flooded corridors. Cathara lay beside her chair, his massive head resting against her leg in a gesture that had become habitual over the past few days. The lion's wound was healing well under the combined care of both human and Zarathian medical technology, but he refused to be separated from Sarah for more than a few minutes at a time. The incident has created what you might call a diplomatic complexity. Prince Vextar was explaining to a holographic conference of both human and Zarathian officials. Cathara has claimed Dr. Chen as Pride family according to our oldest laws. This is not a symbolic gesture. It carries actual legal weight in our society. Sarah shifted uncomfortably as dozens of alien and human faces stared at her from the hologram projectors. I'm not sure I understand the implications, she said. It means, said Admiral Morrison from the human delegation, that you're technically considered a member of the Zarathian royal family, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, which is considerable, added Chancellor Vextol, the prince's chief advisor, whose chitinous features betrayed no emotion. Pride family relationships are sacred to our people. They supersede nationality, political affiliation, even species, apparently. Sarah looked down at Cathara, who was purring softly against her leg. The other 3 lions, Mordan, Zephyra, and Kestel, as she'd learned their names, were arranged around the room like living sculptures, their intelligent eyes tracking every word of the conversation. What exactly does this mean for the treaty negotiations? Asked Dr. Martinez, the head of the human diplomatic corps. Prince Vextar's forearms gestured in what Sarah had learned was the Zarathian equivalent of a shrug. It means that Dr. Chen now has a voice in Zarathian political affairs that equals my own. Any agreement we reach must have her approval as a recognized member of the Royal Pride. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt the weight of dozens of stares, both human and alien, and suddenly understood why the prince had seemed so amused when he'd first explained the situation to her. This is ridiculous, she said finally. I'm a medic, not a diplomat. I saved one lion's life. I didn't sign up to become royalty. Cathara raised his massive head and looked at her with those impossibly intelligent golden eyes. The lion made a soft sound that somehow conveyed both affection and gentle reproach, as if he were reminding her that she'd done much more than simply save his life. The bond between Pride family members is not something that can be easily dismissed, Prince Vextar explained gently. It's based on demonstrated loyalty, courage, and sacrifice. What you did in those flooded chambers, risking your life for a creature that wasn't even your own species, that is the very foundation of what we consider family. Sarah found herself thinking about her own family back on Earth, her parents, who had raised her to believe in helping others regardless of the cost, her sister, who had always said Sarah would end up adopting every stray animal on the planet. They would have understood exactly why she'd jumped into that freezing water without hesitation. There's another complication, Chancellor Vextol continued. The other royal houses are watching this situation very carefully. Your actions have already become something of a legend among our people. There are those who see this as proof that humans possess the kind of courage and loyalty that our warrior culture values above all else. And there are others, added a voice from the Zarathian delegation, who see it as an opportunity to test human commitment to our alliance. Sarah was beginning to understand. Her spontaneous act of compassion had accidentally become a political symbol, and now both species were looking to her to help define the future relationship between their civilizations. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, looking around the room at the expectant faces. "Be yourself," Prince Vextar said simply. The same person who didn't hesitate to risk everything for a drowning lion. That courage, that instinct to help others, that's what impressed my companions. And it's what has impressed my people. Kethara rumbled his agreement, and Sarah found herself smiling despite the enormity of the situation. The lion had been trying to tell her something for the past 3 days, and she was finally beginning to understand what it was. "You're not just accepting me into your family," she said to the lions. "You're accepting humanity, aren't you? You're saying that any species capable of producing someone who would risk their life for a stranger is worth trusting." All 4 lions began purring simultaneously, a sound so deep and resonant that it vibrated through the ship's hull. The Zarathian officials looked impressed, while the human delegation appeared somewhat bewildered by this display of interspecies communication. "That is exactly correct," Prince Vextar said, his own voice carrying a note of respect. "The Pride has spoken. They have declared humans to be worthy of the deepest level of trust our society can offer." Sarah stood up, gently stroking Kethara's mane as she did so. "Then I guess we should stop treating this like a complication and start treating it like the opportunity it is." She turned to face the holographic conference, feeling the lion's steady presence behind her like a physical support. "I propose we use this situation to create something new. Not just a treaty between our governments, but a genuine partnership between our peoples. One based on the same principles that brought me and Kethara together: courage, compassion, and the willingness to risk everything for what's right." The room fell silent as both human and Zarathian officials considered her words. Sarah could feel her heart racing, but Kethara's steady purring beside her gave her the confidence to continue. "The lions chose to accept me not because I'm special, but because I'm representative of what humanity can be at its best. Let's make sure that's what they get." Admiral Morrison was the first to speak. "Dr. Chen, are you volunteering to serve as a permanent liaison between our species?" Sarah looked down at Kethara, whose golden eyes were filled with trust and affection. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm volunteering for something much more important than that. I'm volunteering to help prove that family can extend beyond species, beyond planets, beyond everything we thought we knew about the boundaries of loyalty and love." The lion's purring grew louder, and Sarah realized that somewhere between jumping into that freezing water and standing in this diplomatic conference, she had found her true calling. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She was a bridge between worlds. 2 years after the incident on the Crimson Talon, Sarah stood on the observation deck of New Geneva Station, watching as the first joint human-Zarathian colony ship prepared for launch. The massive vessel bore both human and Zarathian design elements, but what made her smile was the name painted on its hull in both languages: Kethara's Pride. "The final passenger manifest has been approved," Prince Vextar said, approaching from behind with his characteristic forearm stride. 300 human families, 200 Zarathian clans, and, he paused with what Sarah had learned to recognize as Zarathian humor, 4 very large lions who have insisted on personally inspecting every cubic meter of the ship's life support systems. Sarah laughed, a sound that still seemed to delight the prince even after all this time. "I keep telling them they don't need to supervise everything. The engineering teams know what they're doing." "Try explaining that to Morden," the prince replied dryly. "He spent 6 hours yesterday testing the artificial gravity in the ship's gymnasium. I believe he wanted to ensure the hunting simulations would be properly calibrated." Through the station's massive viewport, Sarah could see the colony ship's docking bay, where a familiar golden shape was prowling among the cargo containers. Even at this distance, she could recognize Kethara's distinctive stride. The lion had appointed himself as unofficial security chief for the entire colonization project, and he took the job seriously. "Any word from the advance team?" Sarah asked. "Excellent news. The planet shows even more promise than our initial surveys indicated. Vast grasslands perfect for agriculture, mineral deposits that both our species can utilize, and best of all," the prince's eyes glowed with anticipation, "a climate that will allow the lions to hunt in their natural environment for the first time since they were cubs." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest at the thought. In the years since the rescue, She'd learned more about Zarathian lions than any human alive. The magnificent creatures were actually native to the Zarathian homeworld's vast savannas, but had been brought aboard ships as companions for the royal families. Kethera and his siblings had never known the joy of running free under an open sky. "They're going to love it," she said softly. "The whole project has exceeded our most optimistic projections," Prince Vextar continued. "The agricultural teams have developed hybrid crops that can feed both our species. The architectural planners have designed cities that accommodate both human and Zarathian physiologies. And the cultural exchange programs," he gestured with all four arms in excitement. "Sarah, we're not just building a colony. We're creating an entirely new form of civilization." Through their comm implants, they heard the distinctive sound of Kethera's roar echoing through the station's corridors. It was his way of announcing that he'd found something interesting, or concerning. "We should probably go see what he's discovered now," Sarah said. But she was smiling. Life with four highly intelligent, incredibly curious lions was never boring. They made their way through the station's corridors toward the source of the sound, passing groups of humans and Zarathians working side by side. The sight still filled Sarah with wonder. 2 years ago, the species had been cautious allies at best. Now they were partners in humanity's and Zarathia's greatest adventure. They found Kethera in the station's observation lounge, surrounded by a group of human children who were listening with rapt attention as he demonstrated what could only be described as teaching behaviors. The lion was using his paws to arrange holographic star charts, showing the children the route their colony ship would take to reach their new home. "How does he know how to do that?" Sarah asked in amazement. "Lions are natural teachers," Prince Vextar explained. "In the wild, the pride's knowledge is passed down through demonstration and repetition. Kethera has simply adapted those instincts to space navigation." One of the children, a girl of about 8 with bright red hair, looked up as Sarah approached. "Dr. Chen, Kethera was showing us our new star. He says it's much bigger and warmer than Sul, and that there are 3 moons that will make the nights really bright." Sarah knelt down to the child's level. "Did he tell you about the aurora fields?" she asked conspiratorially. The girl's eyes widened. "Aurora fields? The planet's magnetic field interacts with its 3 moons to create light displays in the sky that change colors every few minutes. It's like having a natural light show every single night." The children erupted in excited chatter, and Kethera rumbled his approval. The lion moved closer to Sarah and gently headbutted her shoulder, his way of saying thank you for adding to the lesson. "You've become quite the ambassador yourself," Prince Vextar observed. Sarah looked around at the mixed group of human and Zarathian children, all of them chattering excitedly about their upcoming adventure. "I had good teachers," she said, scratching behind Kethera's ears. "These lions taught me that family isn't about species or genetics. It's about choosing to care for each other no matter what." The children gradually dispersed to rejoin their families, leaving Sarah, the prince, and Kethera alone in the observation lounge. Through the viewport, they could see the colony ship making its final preparations for departure. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you," Prince Vextar said quietly. "The Colonial Council has been discussing the establishment of what they're calling the Chen Doctrine, a set of principles for first contact with new species based on the example you set with Kethera. They want to make compassion and mutual aid the foundation of all future diplomatic relationships." Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment. "That's hardly necessary. Anyone would have done what I did." "No," the prince said firmly. "That's exactly the point. You believe anyone would have done it, but the truth is that most beings, human or Zarathian, would have prioritized their own survival. You didn't even hesitate. That selflessness, that instant commitment to helping another creature in distress, that's uniquely human, and it's become the foundation of everything we've built together." Kethera moved to sit beside Sarah, his massive presence warm and comforting. The lion had grown even larger over the past 2 years, but his personality remained the same, gentle, intelligent, and absolutely devoted to his human pride sister. "The colony ship departs in 6 hours, Prince Vextar continued. "This will be the first of many, but it will always be special. It represents the moment when 2 species stopped being allies and became family." Sarah stood and walked to the viewport, watching as the final supplies were loaded onto the ship that would carry nearly 1,000 souls to a new world. In the cargo bay, she could see Mordan, Zephyra, and Kestal prowling among the containers, each one taking their role as protectors seriously. "You know what the best part is?" she said finally. Those children we were just talking to, they're going to grow up thinking this is normal. To them, having Zarathian neighbors and lion companions and multi-species families will just be the way the universe works. A universe where species barriers matter less than character. Prince Vextar agreed, where the willingness to help a stranger in need is valued above all else. Kether arose and moved to stand beside them at the viewport, his golden eyes reflecting the stars beyond. The lion let out a soft rumble that somehow conveyed satisfaction, pride and anticipation all at once. In that moment, Sarah realized that her impulsive decision to save a drowning lion had set in motion events that would reshape the galaxy, not through conquest or technology or political maneuvering, but through the simple recognition that compassion could bridge any gap, even the vast distances between stars. The colony ship Kethara's Pride began to move away from the station, its engines igniting to carry its precious cargo toward a new world, where humans and Zarathians would build something unprecedented together. And at the heart of it all was a lesson learned in the flooded corridors of a dying ship, that the greatest strength any species could possess was the courage to risk everything for another's life. As Sarah watched the ship disappear into the star field, she felt Kethara's massive paw rest gently on her shoulder. The lion's touch carried a message clearer than any words could convey. This was just the beginning.